Hi, everybody. When I got this position, a friend of mine said, it's as if your entire life has led to this moment. And I said, that sounds more like an epitaph. But I want to talk to you briefly about what the Cancer Moonshot is all about. To begin with, we all know that there's a lot of technological innovation going on with immunotherapy and other new ways of targeting the ultimate cancer-killing system, which is our own immune system. But technological advances that we're making under the current system are going to be much faster if we change the system. So I want to talk to you briefly about several systems that we need to target and how we can change them. The first one is the research system itself. When you think that our way of classifying cancer comes from the French in the 1700s, our way of doing publications comes from the Germans in the 1800s, and our way of funding research comes from Vannevar Bush in the post-World War II era, I would ask you, how many of you want to go back to the 50s in doing anything else you do? And yet that's still how we fund research. The people that we fund spend a third of their time writing grants to get the money, which is like asking Derek Jeter to take a few years off to sell bonds to build Yankee Stadium. Let scientists do science should be what we're doing. But the problem with our research system is all the incentives are geared toward tenure, publication, more grants. If you're young, you don't get a grant. If you're too bold, you don't get a grant. If you're not in the right institution, you don't get a grant. So we have to address the incentives in the system. Everybody in the system knows that the incentives actually prevent you from spending as much time with patients as you'd like to. So that's number one. Number two is we have to change the way the government itself operates. Why is it that government grants are the slowest to get? When Sean Parker announced his new project for immunotherapy, he's talking about giving rapid grants for bold ideas and sharing the IP with universities and creating a data collaboration among 6 major universities, soon to be more, I would assume. Why is it that the government isn't leading in sharing data? Why is it that the government isn't leading in doing things as fast as possible? Every time somebody launches a new foundation, they always say, we're going to do this faster than the government. Well, who has the real money? The government. So we need to change that by speeding things up. Now, if you do everything right to get to the FDA, then the question is, will the FDA do everything right by you? No country is approving cancer drugs faster than the United States. And the FDA in the past several years has done a much better job of moving drugs through the system and creating breakthrough designations, accelerated approvals, and approving combination therapies. But here's the problem. Our entire system of evaluating clinical trials and the efficacy of drugs is changing. There's no longer a single drug strategy. It's a combination drug strategy, just as it was with HIV/AIDS. How do we do clinical trials in the combination therapy world when all of the regulations are built on a single drug trial model? How do we get the pharmaceutical industry to work together to try drugs in combination rather than one at a time? And how do we price a combination therapy in which each drug alone could be an expensive solution? And I accent the word solution because what's happening now is we're getting away from chronic drugs and we're getting to the Sovaldis of the world and the crizotinibs of the world that actually cure a certain subset of patients in a given disease. That leads to the next problem, which is our financial system for health. Everybody thinks of health. If I were to say health, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Usually it's cost, when in fact it should be asset. How many times have you heard, at least you have your health? That usually means you've had a really bad day in every other aspect of your life. Health is the original asset that makes every other asset valuable. And yet we still think of health as a cost. We only talk about insurance. We don't think of it as an asset the way we do agriculture or energy. Why does that matter? Here's why it matters. When there's innovation in healthcare solutions, it's a bad day for the insurance industry, right? A new drug comes on the market, like Sovaldi, that cures something. Insurance companies freak out because now they're spending $60,000 a patient more than they had planned. They're saving $200,000 over that patient's life, but that's then. This is now. In every other market, we call that a futures market. That's how you hedge current liabilities and gain future benefits. It's through a futures market. Agriculture, farmers do it. In transportation, airlines do it. Health is not organized as an asset class. It's still organized as a cost. So it is not just that drugs are too expensive, it's that we have no way to amortize the cost of drugs over a patient's life, and we have no way to help the insurance companies hedge their liability to pay for a breakthrough innovation and to capture the future gains today. In every other industry, that is a norm of a futures market, but there is none in healthcare. It is not a question of price controls or unbridled prices. It's a question of having a rational financial system. So you might say, well, why the moonshot? Is this a good or a bad analogy? Well, let me tell you this. I happen to have been involved with the space program for many, many years when I was in the government. Kennedy didn't say, we're going to study moonography. He didn't say we're going to give new PhDs in rocketry. What he said was, we're going to send a human being to the moon and bring him back safely. That's exactly what Vice President Biden and President Obama are trying to do with this moonshot. We're trying to get people through their lives without the scourge of cancer. Everybody has to die, but you don't have to die for years because of cancer. So in the sense of the moonshot put the astronaut at the center of everything we do, the moonshot we're dealing with is putting the patient, and we're all patients, at the center of everything we do. The other thing that's important is that the original moonshot had to build the largest engine in the history of the world to lift off of Earth's gravity to carry all that load into space. Well, we have to build the biggest engine of reform in human history to break out of the bureaucratic gravity that has kept our system mired in 1950s thinking when it's the 21st century. Thank you. The other thing is, this, unlike the original moonshot, is not a spectator sport. I thought that I was, as a guy, had to worry about prostate cancer or high cholesterol. And one day I called my doctor to get the results of my physical. He didn't call me. Think about that for a minute. And he said, oh, by the way, you have leukemia. Oh, by the way, you have leukemia. So I started a 1.5 to 2 year process of watching and waiting, and then 6 months of chemotherapy, and had a complete recovery and had no side effects from the chemotherapy. How's that possible? It's possible because we've made a lot of progress in treating chronic lymphocytic leukemia that benefited me. But for the rest of us, we don't know what kind of cancer we are going to get or our loved ones are going to get. We don't know if we're going to be a lucky one or one of the hard-to-treat cancers. There is a role for everybody to play. So let me ask you to do this. I tell people I need to know their if-only list. And this is what you talk about after I'm done and you've had a few drinks and you're out in the hall and you go, if only the government would do, if only the FDA would do, if only Pharma would do, that's the list I want you to send me. My email is real simple. It's gsimon@officeofthevicepresident.executiveofficeofthepresident.gov. It's actually simpler than that, gsimon@ovp.eop.gov. And if you email me and tell me you came from this conference, I'll make sure you get an answer, because we need to know what your if-only list is so we can put our what-if list together. What if every cancer center shared their data with every other cancer center? What if every cancer patient was tested for a mutation for which there is a drug? And then we can put together our we are list of things we're doing, and those can trace back to your if-only list. So please, don't watch this effort, be part of this effort. The only way we're going to get there is if we all believe we can get there and we all work together. And thank you so much for letting me interrupt your dinner tonight.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It really is a great pleasure to be here tonight to introduce, for a fireside chat, I gather, which is an interesting concept right here, Rick Gonzalez, Chairman and CEO of AbbVie. Rick became the Chairman and CEO of AbbVie back in January 2013 when Abbott and AbbVie separated. Prior to that time, Rick was a 30-year Abbott veteran. He served as President and Chief Operating Officer and in a number of senior executive roles throughout the company, including President and Chief Operating Officer of the Medical Products Group, Senior Vice President and President of the former Hospital Products Division, which actually became Hospira prior to its recent acquisition by Pfizer, Vice President and President of the Health Systems Division, and Divisional Vice President and General Manager for diagnostic operations in the United States and in Canada. Rick has overseen strong growth at AbbVie and an increased focus on R&D. AbbVie's growth is underpinned by a pipeline that has the potential to yield more than 20 new drug or indication approvals by the end of 2020. Since the spinoff, AbbVie has invested heavily in R&D, as I said, further strengthening its R&D organization through the integration of experienced teams with new talents and biannual increasing that R&D budget. At AbbVie, Rick has made it his mission to create an innovative biopharmaceutical company that is delivering a consistent stream of medicines that advance the standard of care for patients. He and his management team have focused on creating an innovative, patient-focused environment, combining the very best of AbbVie's legacy as part of a well-established, high-execution pharmaceutical company with the very best attributes of a biotech. Under Rick's leadership, AbbVie is focused on 4 core therapeutic areas which can add the most value: immunology, virology, neurology, and oncology. AbbVie's commitment to oncology was underscored by the company's recent acquisition of Pharmacyclics last year. The acquisition further boosted AbbVie's strong position in oncology, which AbbVie has been steadily building through internal investment and external partnerships. Today, AbbVie's oncology pipeline includes multiple new molecules being studied in clinical trials for more than 15 cancers and tumor types, including some of the most widespread and difficult to treat, such as multiple myeloma and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. AbbVie is taking a leading role in some of the most exciting science in oncology, including immunotherapies, apoptosis, and DNA repair. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rick and to Nancy Snyderman, who's going to be with him.
Thank you, Ed. Sir?
Thank you.
So you're a lifer.
A lifer. By the way,
Some
it's a
people just can't
fireside
leave
chat,
the
but I'm not looking for a lot of fire here, okay?
No, but you're bringing some weather tomorrow. It's going to be 37 and rainy, so what did you do?
Chicago, what can I say?
Chicago. So how does a lifer at Abbott step aside and then become the head of the new company, AbbVie?
Well, that's an interesting question. No, I mean, I obviously grew up essentially at Abbott, and throughout the course of my career, I ran basically all the businesses of Abbott. In the last 6 or 7 years, I was the COO of all of Abbott, including the pharma business. So it was a business I knew extremely well. I ended up retiring when I was about 53 years old because—
That's way too young.
Well, I only stayed retired about 2 years.
To my point.
As my former boss, Miles White, who's the CEO of Abbott, he said I flunked retirement. But interestingly enough, for the conference we're in now, 15 years ago, I was diagnosed with metastatic squamous cell carcinoma.
Of?
Head and neck cancer.
Which part of your head? And, you know, you're talking to a head and neck surgeon, so now you have to be specific.
Tonsils.
Tonsil, okay.
And
HPV, or were you a smoker?
I didn't smoke. I did cigars, which I don't do anymore.
We call that smoking, you know.
So, so I'm one of the fortunate ones that ultimately got cured, and so I've had that experience. But ultimately, I decided to retire, and then I realized that I wasn't wired very well to retire, so it didn't have the intellectual stimulation I was looking for. So I came back, and it turned out that at that time, Abbott was in the process of looking at spinning out the pharma business, and so I obviously had a fair amount of experience.
Did it take a lot of arm twisting, or did you say, yes, I'm in?
No, it didn't take a lot of arm twisting. It's a business I know well, I know the people well, and I think it was an exciting opportunity, and I love what I do.
So talking about opportunities, take me to the Pharmacyclics acquisition.
I think Pharmacyclics was a unique opportunity. It was one we identified very early on when we spun out, but we didn't think it was available because of the partnership with J&J, and you know, the company had done well as an IPO, but we liked the technology. We liked BTK inhibition. We thought it was a technology that would allow for expansion, rapid expansion into a number of hematological malignancies, potentially beyond that, and could have application beyond even oncology in areas like immunology. And then the management team at Pharmacyclics decided that they were going to try and run a process, and we participated, and we're fortunate to win that process. And it fit well strategically.
Did you just pay more, or did they think you were a better fit?
I think culturally, well, ultimately when you win the bid, usually you are the highest bidder, so I'd have to say we were the highest bidder, but we were about 4% higher than the next two bidders.
But it was well worth it.
So in a blind bidding process, that's fairly close. But I think strategically we fit well. And one of the things that we have done is we had dedicated ourselves to oncology about 15 years ago. We built a significant discovery effort in oncology, particularly in targeted mechanisms. And we've been building that out over the course of time, and a number of those mechanisms are in the hematological malignancy area, like our BCL2 inhibitor that was just approved recently for CLL and 17p deletion patients. But that asset fit well into starting to build a leadership position in hematological malignancies, and we were attracted to it because of its broad indication and its ability to be able to move into frontline.
So companies that don't invest in R&D have been in the news recently. You have doubled down in R&D. Why?
Well, I think for a biopharmaceutical company, and I tell the organization this all the time, I mean, that is the lifeblood of our company. You know, our vision, our mission in life is to try to bring a consistent stream of innovative new medicines. We describe it as having a remarkable impact on patients' lives. And despite all the debate there is, and there's tremendous debate around affordability of innovative new therapies, including pharmaceuticals, what I would tell you is when you bring forward an innovative therapy, not only are the regulators motivated to move that therapy, and I think the FDA has done a wonderful job with this breakthrough designation and how they advance assets, but payers, ultimately, the system pays for very effective therapies. So the alignment is if you do things for patients that allow you to bring significant improvement in standard of care, the system will reward that and the financial rewards follow. And so that is essentially what we try to create.
So when you create this intellectual take-a-risk environment and you emphasize that R&D matters, from a 36,000-foot view, how do you take an idea to the marketplace?
Well, ideas in our industry typically take a long time to mature, particularly if it's very innovative ideas. I mean, I'll give you an example. So our BCL2 inhibitor, we started working...
Which has applicability for what?
Well, today it's in CLL, but it has broad applicability across a number of hematological malignancies. AML, we've now demonstrated some data. Multiple myeloma, we believe it will be effective in. But we started working on that asset 15 years ago, actually a little more than 15 years ago. And the first generation asset, which was called ABT263, we took it into the clinic and we started dose escalating, and we saw basically platelet depletion that couldn't be managed. So we couldn't dose escalate to therapeutic levels. We had to basically go back to the drawing board, make a highly specific BCL2 inhibitor because what we realized is we were cross-reacting with BCL-XL. So we engineered that out. Took us 7 more years to do that. Came back into the marketplace, and now you have this incredibly innovative therapy.
But can the average company do that? A 15-year commitment is a significant amount of capital.
Well, I think it is one of the things that we have to wrestle with here. If we are going to win this war, it's going to require that kind of commitment because we've learned a tremendous amount over the last 10 years about the biology of cancer, about the genetics around mutations, being able to come forward with targeted therapies. But I can tell you, engineering those therapies, doing the testing that's necessary to refine those therapies is going to take time. I mean, you take immunotherapy right now. I mean, it is a remarkable impact we're seeing. But yet, in the cancers where it is effective, we're still only seeing about 25 to 35% of patients get long-term disease control. So there's a tremendous opportunity to have next-generation immunotherapies that allow for deeper response across those patients. And there are tumor types that don't respond effectively, that we can't unmask the signal and let the immune system identify those tumors well, like colorectal cancer is a good example of that. And so it's going to take that kind of commitment, and not all companies can do it,
Right.
but the successful companies that are committed to creating innovative therapies will be able to do it, and that's one of the reasons why you have to invest long-term in R&D.
So today, I had the pleasure of interviewing and talking with this course summit organizers, and Monica and Daniel talked about whether this was a moonshot or a war on cancer. I suspect you see it both ways.
Well, I think historically, if you looked at it, so what, 40, 50 years ago, we declared the war on cancer, right?
Richard Nixon.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I would say we've made significant progress, but it was far more of a moonshot. If your definition is you're going to have long-term durable disease control and or cures, we've made progress, but certainly we're nowhere close to that today. And I think for those 40 or so years, it was certainly much more of a moonshot than it is today, based on what we know about the biology of cancers. I'd say the next 10 or 15 years, we are going to see tremendous advancements in therapies.
Primarily because of immunotherapy?
I don't think it's just immunotherapy. I mean, certainly I think immunotherapy is going to be a very important player in that, in being able to drive the immune system to recognize tumors and go and identify them and destroy them. And I think there are ways, next generation opportunities to be able to do that even more effectively than we're doing it today. But I'd also say targeted therapies, I mean, 2 examples that we have where if you truly understand the mechanism of the disease and you can hit that target like a BCL2 or a BTK inhibitor, where you have a highly specific target, reduces a lot of the side effect profile or off-target toxicity. Those are the kinds of targeted therapies that ultimately I think will be successful. I think it's also becoming more and more obvious to us with the level of mutations that we see in most tumors that it's going to require combination therapy to get to this long-term disease control.
So you recently announced a collaboration or partnership with the University of Chicago. Why the University of Chicago, other than it's in your backyard, and why was that important?
I think the University of Chicago has a fine oncology group that does tremendous translational work. We are working with them in the area of immuno-oncology and a number of other areas, so I mean, it's a great institution to work with. But I'd say we have collaborations with MD Anderson. You know, the industry and academic axis of coming together, I think, is absolutely critical.
And that seems to happen more now than, for sure, more than 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I think partnering with academia, partnering with other smaller biotech companies, that is going to be the model that is most successful going forward.
Have you had your genome sequenced?
That's kind of a personal question, isn't it?
Have you had a rectal recently?
That's even more personal. So I'll answer.
We're all about cancer prevention.
I'll answer the first one. How's that? I have had it sequenced.
Oh, but you won't answer the other question.
Not lately. Am I turning red?
Yeah. Yes. Appropriately, though. So what are you going to do with your genome? Are you going to put it up in the cloud?
Well, I'd say I did it more out of curiosity. I'm not
And
exactly
what did you
sure.
find? I had mine sequenced too. So I'll share mine if you'll share yours.
Okay.
Did Illumina do yours?
Yes.
Okay, Illumina
Yeah.
did mine. So anything fun?
Well, I think it said I had a higher level of risk in certain areas.
I
And
have
actually, cancer was one of them.
And so that, interestingly, historically, that's proven to be true. But I assume now you look at genome and lifestyle as two extraordinarily important factors that intertwine.
Well, sure. I mean, I think if whether you had your genome done or not, I think there are a number of cancers that you can prevent through lifestyle changes, right?
Yep.
Stop smoking cigars is an example, right?
That's one.
You know, effective screening in certain areas. And I think the population has to try to maximize those tools to try to reduce the incidence.
There was a fascinating panel today on the importance of early detection. And we had talked earlier about early detection over treating, early detection finding and sitting and waiting, but early detection in ways that maybe the American populace doesn't think about: blood markers, early diagnostic tools that pathologists are comfortable with but other people aren't. Do you look to your Abbott days as being an integral part of how you think about technology pushing pharma?
Well, I think certainly within Abbott we had a major diagnostic effort, and certainly molecular diagnostics played a very important role. I think more and more now, as we identify these targeted therapies, we know it's going to be a subset of that patient population, and being able to identify them with an effective diagnostic is critical to the selection of patients going forward for treatment, but more importantly, to be able to power the study appropriately to be able to see the signal. If only 5% of the patients in a colorectal study are going to have this marker, if you run an all-comer study, you're never going to see it.
Right.
And so being able to identify those markers, having a diagnostic that will allow you to pick them out, and then powering the study against those patients is the only way to tease that signal out.
I'm accustomed to being around physician scientists who complain about the FDA. And today, I've heard nothing but laudatory things about the FDA, including what you just said a second ago. Is this a new and improved FDA?
I think to some extent it is. And the Europeans are also moving down a similar path. I mean, the FDA with this breakthrough designation has really identified areas where there's a significant unmet need. They will fast track those assets through, and they'll look at it from an appropriate risk-benefit standpoint based on the amount of data you need to be able to prove that. And it's been a very effective program, in my opinion.
So how do you assess the pharma landscape today? And I say that just putting the word politics out there, not knowing what's going to happen this summer into the fall. Is this a tougher time to be in pharma and biotech? Do you worry about what might happen in the fall?
Well, I think I worry more about the rhetoric, right, around different aspects of our industry. And certainly, you know, I think there are examples that none of us are proud of that have occurred in the industry. But what I would say is it paints a picture that's not consistent, in my opinion, with what most innovative biopharmaceutical companies are all about, like AbbVie as an example. That certainly isn't consistent with what we do. I think this industry has played a very important role in being able to bring therapies to patients that cure diseases that are devastating for patients.
Do you think the American public understands that?
No.
So, you know, I used to work at Johnson & Johnson, and I worked at General Electric, and I was always sort of astounded that the big companies that do really great things do a lousy job getting their messages out. So how does AbbVie do a better job than most explaining that you're the good guys?
Well, I think part of it is driven around patients' access. We have to have a system that allows for better access and truly, to the point the gentleman made earlier this evening, making sure that the incentives are set up in a way that the long-term cost and value is assessed appropriately.
And how do you assess value?
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. So people talk about the cost of a drug that can extend someone's life 2, 3, 4 years with cancer, and it costs $100,000 a year.
Yep.
So I said I had stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma 15 years ago. At the end of the first year of my therapy, my entire bill was $225,000, and they didn't use any fancy drugs on me. They used, old chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, right? So, and my
I assume you got vincristine and platinum and radiation.
Right, and so my downstream costs for the next 5 years, every 3 months I had CAT scans and PET scans, and now ultimately I'm grateful because I wouldn't be sitting here otherwise, but there's a cost to that, and if you can develop an innovative therapy that reduces that downstream cost, that's value to the system.
So let's talk about innovative therapies for a second. I'm always flummoxed that in the United States of America, and it is my pet peeve, more people aren't immunized for diseases. We now have an effective HPV vaccine, and yet the average vaccination rate is only about 38% in this country, and that's only for 2 shots. If you were the king of healthcare, would you mandate vaccinations?
If I was the king of healthcare, I think I'd try to set the system up where it rewarded the best clinical benefit and outcome for patients.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your leadership style? Are people scared of you?
I wouldn't say people are scared of me.
So what's your leadership style?
I'd say it's, I tend to be a guy who is participative.
And what does that mean from a CEO standpoint?
Well, I think you listen to people. I tell the organization, I always think I'm right. That doesn't mean I'm always right. So I want you to tell me when I'm not. I'll listen to it. I'll decide whether I believe it or not, and we'll make the best decision going forward.
And that's why you're a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say today to the 20-year-old Rick Gonzalez?
The 20-year-old Rick Gonzalez and the 62-year-old Rick Gonzalez, I've learned a lot in those 40 years. So I'd say probably be a little more patient.
Are you?
No.
So what's the second thing that we might have seen some change on?
Look, I'd say when I had that health experience, when an oncologist sits you down and says you have a 35% chance of being alive 5 years from now, that's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I look at things from a patient standpoint much differently than I did before that.
So when you suddenly crunch the numbers and you realize that 2 out of 3 people in your situation won't be here, do you think I feel sorry for those 2 other SOBs?
Well, I certainly felt bad for all 3 of them.
But you harnessed something. So, I mean, stage 2 head and neck cancer isn't a treat. Stage 3 is terrible. Stage 4 is not something the average person emerges from. You harnessed something beyond just good luck.
Yeah. I think, look, to go through that therapy requires a certain amount of intestinal fortitude, right?
Yeah.
And the people that do that have the best outcomes.
So when you know that you now help to change pharmaceutical development, landscape of healthcare in the United States, but you come from a patient perspective, not just a CEO, how does that make you a different leader?
I think it allows us to be able to balance the appropriate trade-offs that you have to make. I'll give you an example. So we were developing a drug where there was a relatively minor population indication that we could have used the drug in, a pediatric indication. in and of itself, it would not have been financially justified, but we went ahead and did it.
Because?
Because it's the right thing to do.
When you know that something is the right thing to do from a gut standpoint, but you still have to worry about an ROI, you have a board, you have shareholders, those are a lot of very disparate elements to manage.
Yeah,
At any given time, does one win out over the other?
Well, you have to balance all of them, right? We have to give our shareholders a return, and we do. So I'm not saying that, but still means you have the ability to balance it in an appropriate way.
So you also provide health care for all your employees. You know, this has been a very public comment from Jeff Immelt, who's the CEO of GE, that he hates it. I mean, he hates health insurance. He worries about the long-term health care costs. How do you budget it in? How do you manage it? And do you make it a value add for your employees?
We do. I mean, we manage it appropriately, but we do fundamentally believe it's an important benefit for our employees.
And I assume they appreciate it.
They do.
Yeah. How old is the average person who works for AbbVie? Do you have an aging workforce? Do you have a young workforce?
Probably average age is late 40s.
Okay, so somewhere in the middle. How do you now attract young, smart millennials to want to join a bigger, I mean, all the hot stuff and now are startups. How do you get millennials to say, no, this is a place where you can come and innovate, this is a place where you can call home, and maybe turn into a lifer like you?
Well, I don't know that there's many lifers like me anymore because the society's pretty mobile, but I would say it's the culture. If you create the right culture where people want to come, you'll attract those people.
And when you talk to 27-year-olds who are coming out of their MDs, PhDs, what do you say to them as that's sort of the secret sauce that makes AbbVie special, that makes you want to get up in the morning?
I tell them, you should be here because you want to make a difference. If you don't want to make a difference, this is the wrong place for you.
So what's on your bedside table right now with regard to books, magazines?
I mostly read work stuff.
You mostly, S1s?
Yeah, sometimes S1s, yes.
What's the last good movie you saw?
My wife's a huge movie buff, so, and I'm terrible with names, but
Just describe it.
Martian.
Oh, I love that movie. Why did you like Martian?
It was entertaining.
It was entertaining.
I'm still not sure you would have really survived, but yeah.
Ditto. What's on your playlist, if I could get into your iPod?
What do I like to do?
No, what music do you listen to?
Oh, music.
Your iPad will come to.
Yeah. I listen to all kinds of music. But I'd say popular music, you know, pop, some other, you know, I even like electric dance music.
You do? Huh. Can you dance?
No.
Oh, good.
Horrible.
What country have you not been to that you would love to go to?
God, I've been in most countries around the world.
Which country would you like to go back to that you didn't have enough time in?
I like Australia.
Why?
I don't know, I just like it. People are nice.
You know why you like? Because they like us. Yeah, Aussies like Americans. That's why Americans love Australia. We feel like it's home. Yeah, you know, it's the one country in the world where you can go as an American. It's like,
Right.
oh my God, you don't
fit.
hate me.
You fit.
Exactly, you fit. You can go to New Zealand and get great lamb. So I'm not going to ask you what keeps you up at night. I want to know what gives you the drive to get up every morning and work as hard now as you've ever worked before.
I think there's two things, right? There's one, the drive to create medicines that make a difference, and then, you know, I grew up in this company, so I have a tremendous dedication to the people who work there and the shareholders.
How tough was it for you to fire the first person you had to fire?
That was a long time ago.
Have you fired a lot of people since?
No, I don't fire lots of people.
Now you can delegate it.
Yeah. You know, I think it's, I'd say what's tougher, because usually if you fire somebody in our company, they did something pretty significant, right? What's tougher is if you have to do a reduction in force. That's a much more
hurts.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, that hurts. Do you foresee that coming?
At AbbVie, no.
Good.
Yeah.
So your big blockbuster, wonderful drug, Humira. Patients love it. Market loves it. You love it. How long is it safe?
Well, certainly our goal is to continue to grow that market segment, and we think we've publicly said we believe in the U.S. it will be safe through 2022.
So what do you do to relax?
Work out.
And what do you do to work out?
I mostly lift weights and run.
Run? Are you a good runner?
Yeah, pretty good runner.
And how much do you run at a time?
I
hate to run.
Usually 2.5, 3 miles.
That's really good. So what is your source of news?
Mostly the company.
Company what?
They send me on my iPhone and my iPad.
You mean curated news? That's like, you know, being in a country that I won't even mention.
Look, I read the Wall Street Journal. I read the New York Times.
Okay, that qualifies. That qualifies. When's the last time you read something that was just totally junk and you thought, I'm wasting my time, but you read it anyway?
I read some magazines that were like that.
Counts. What sport do you wish you were good at, but you never were?
Basketball. I'm too short.
National League, American League?
National.
Of course. And the Cubs should win when?
I hope soon.
What makes Chicago a magical place to live in?
Oh, it's a great city.
Why?
Culturally, the people are great. It's a clean, relatively safe city. I live in the city of Chicago, so with the exception of the winters, it's a fabulous place.
If you and I had this conversation 10 years from now, and you look back on the success of AbbVie, what would you say is its crowning jewel?
People.
People? Well, you're one of them.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.